friends as well. We are a charity which promotes Armenian culture. We organize events like this, different projects, exhibitions, performances, film screenings. We just had a lovely film screening 2 days ago. We have a really interesting lecture next week. We'll talk about it after Armen's talk. We're moving soon. That's our very exciting big news, where we can display our very rich library that David knows everything about it in the storage. We also run language classes, Eastern and Western Armenian, so if you want to learn Armenian, talk to this wonderful man over there. And pick up some friend forms, support us so we can continue doing this. And now we're ready to listen to Dr. Armen Yesayants, who is here from Yerevan. I personally am super excited to hear this talk because he's the director of exhibition at Kapesyan Art Center. And if you've been in Yerevan, I'm sure you know the building in Kafkas, like we call it. I'm sure everyone had a nice glass of wine in Kafkas wine bars. And when Kapesyan opened in 2009.
Yes. I will tell about it.
Yeah, it was an absolutely revolutionary thing, very different from type of galleries and exhibitions we had before that, very stale, very censored. And they completely changed how art is created and displayed. So let's say welcome to Dr. Yesayants.
First of all, good evening. I'm really very happy and honored to be here, and I want to thank the Armenian Institute for this opportunity to share what I know about Armenian art in general, and of course about the Fashion Center for the Arts. The title itself is very ambitious, and of course it is impossible to talk about modern and contemporary Armenian art just in 40 minutes, covering what happened in the last 100 years. But we might even a little bit scratch the surface only. But anyway, I think there is an opportunity to see what happened through the exhibitions that the Fashion Center for the Arts curated during the 10 years of its activities. Because last year we also celebrated our anniversary, so it's a good occasion also to summarize what the Fashion Center for the Arts did in the perspective of presenting Armenian art. So, and that's why what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about I'm going to tell about the exhibition programming that we had and how we covered different stages and aspects of the Armenian modern and contemporary Armenian art, beginning from 20s of the last century and up to 2018-19. So first of all, I want to begin with some historical review about the Fashion Center for the Arts, because maybe some of you don't know about how it happened, the architectural thing, and etc. First of all, on the left side you can see the architectural plan of Yerevan, which was approved in 20s, just nearly 100 years ago, and the author of this plan was Alexander Tamanyan. Like the modern Yerevan as we know now, well, partially as we know now, was how Tamanyan planned it. And even in this very first plan, he had the idea of connecting the upper and lower parts of the city via this northern arrow of staircases, like stairs, cascade of fountains and green areas, but it wasn't implemented until the 70s. That's when another chief architect of Yerevan, Jim Torosyan, with his peers, had the idea of cascade complex. That's how it's called in general, even today when it is already the Fashion Center for the Arts. Anyway, everybody calling it just cascade because of the architectural visual scene that you can see there. But it was unfinished in late 80s because of the collapse of the USSR, the Karabakh movement, and also the earthquake in Spitak. So in 90s, the whole city was totally abandoned. It was in a very horrible situation. And by the beginning of 2000, American businessman of Armenian descent, Gerard Kfesyan, had the idea of bringing part of this collection to Yerevan and to renovate the whole architectural area, the garden, which is now the Kfesyan Sculpture Garden. And in 2009, it was a huge construction and regeneration period for nearly 7-8 years. And in 2009, the Kfesyan Center for the Arts was open. And one of the missions of the Kfesyan Center for the Arts is to present the best of modern world art in Yerevan and to show the best of Armenian culture to the world. And what we did in the beginning, we were doing the first part of the mission, filling the gap of how the modern and contemporary world art is presented in Yerevan via the collection pieces that Mr. Kfesyan had. So later we began also doing other exhibitions to also cover the second and the most important part of our mission, is presenting the Armenian art. So now let's begin with the very beginning of the 20th century, like the Modernist period, how it reflected. And one of the artists that I would like to talk about was Georg Grigoryan, who has this nickname Giotto. There are different versions why he got this name, but it is mostly connected with the Italian master of the Renaissance, Giotto di Bondone, from the 12th century. So another artist, Yerevan Kochar, said that Georg Grigoryan and his artworks looks like Giotto is painting those, and that's how he was called Giotto. We did this exhibition in 2017, and he lived in Georgia most of the time, but in the last 10 years he lived in Yerevan in the 50s. And how you can see in the 2030s, in the beginning of his career, there was a huge impact of the Russian modernism, because it wasn't, in case of culture and art perspective, it wasn't the same during the whole 70 years of Soviet period, because in 20s it was more avant-garde, was revolutionary, very interesting. The problem with art began later during the Stalinist period in 30s, when so-called unions were founded. The artists' unions, the composers, and etc. So Giotto was one of the few Armenian artists who studied in Vkhutemas. This is a Russian college in Moscow. It is very hard to translate it, but it's like higher fine arts academy of sculpture and painting. So he studied there, and later when he was doing different sketches and this kind of drawings, but what we did and what we do in general at our center, even when we present an artist that is really acclaimed or celebrated, we are trying to reveal some layers that are not known in general. And in case of Giotto, when we did this exhibition, which was dedicated to his anniversary in 2017, we collaborated with the National Gallery and we showcased art pieces that were never been exhibited, even at the National Gallery. So those pieces that you see now, they are mostly graphic artworks, and Giotto wasn't that famous for his graphic art pieces, printed or just watercolor and pencil works on paper. So we did this exhibition and we revealed him from a new point of view. That's what we are doing all the time. And Giotto, he was one of the dissidents also during the 30s. He had some problems with KGB, and he burned some of his paintings. But what we discovered, that his paintings and graphic arts are really very different, and maybe the real artist was between that difference, when you can find what he really was, because it was very hard during the Soviet period to act freely as an artist. So that's what we're doing. These are some pieces from the exhibition that we did, and we chose this blue color because He also had a very strong connection with Armenian poet Yesayants. He did several portraits of him, and blue was one of the colors which also Chalents would refer to as a color of sadness and tragedy, and that's how we try to also put it in this way in the exhibition. The graphic artworks that we showed, they did really, they uncovered a new layer, and there were some articles that art historians were really excited and fascinated, and this how the Cubo-futuristic and so-called constructivism movements really impacted the artists in 2030s from Russia on the first place. The other artist that I would really like to talk about is, of course, Arshil Gorky, whose exhibition we did in 2009, just in the year of opening the exhibition. And it was a revolutionary thing for Armenia because it was the only exhibition that Arshil Gorky has ever had in Armenia. There are no pieces, original pieces, like they are in private collections, but state museums in Armenia, they don't own any piece by Arshil Gorky. And although Arshil Gorky was a revolutionary artist in 30s and 40s, for those of you that don't know, he was one of the fathers of abstract expressionism. He was a genocide survivor. His real name was Vostanik Adoyan. He was from Van province of Ottoman Empire or Western Armenia, and in 40s, in the beginning of 40s, he was one of the founders in New York of the abstract expressionism school. But he had a tragic life, and he, at the end, eventually committed suicide because of different events bringing to that point. But this exhibition, from like this selection of artworks from the fashion collection, was very important because even Arshil Gorky, and so coming back to the Soviet period, Arshil Gorky wasn't famous in Armenia. They found out about him in 60s because one of the Armenian artists, he was participating in Venice Biennale, where the US pavilion had pieces by Arshil Gorky. So later he presented him in Yerevan. So that's how Armenian artists found out about Arshil Gorky. That's how Arshil Gorky, not directly, even after his death, impacted the development of Armenian abstract art in 60s, 70s in Armenia. And while we are talking, diaspora in general impacted the development of Armenian art in Soviet Armenia. Because when in 40s, I don't want to talk about much about this selection because they are mostly graphic pieces. I just wanted to point out that we did this exhibition. It was the only one, since I hope someday we will have a huge retrospective of Arshil Gorky, which would be amazing. But what I was talking about, that the impact of diaspora and of those who were coming from abroad to Yerevan and Armenia in general was huge. So during the 20th century, there were different schools developing in Armenia. One was like the impact of Gyumri, Shirak region, artists from that period. The other was Yerevan, local artists. But the other part, Georgian artists from Tiflis, the Tbilisi school, like Yerevan Kochar or Rajanov or Elibekan family. But the huge impact that the influence that Armenian artists in Armenia had was beginning from the late 40s, when the repatriation period began. Like there were different periods of repatriation in 1946, then 1947, and a lot of artists came to Armenia after the World War II. And most of them were coming to Armenia as a country who fought the Nazis and who just had the victory, but no one could imagine what the situation that Armenia was really in. And some of them were really disappointed afterwards. When we are talking about Yerevan Kochar, he moved to Yerevan in late 30s, in 36, and he was one of the victims of Stalinism regime as well. Yerevan Kochar, he is like, you can talk about him like a lecture, just a separate talk can be about Yerevan Kochar. When we pick, I don't know, 5 artists from the Armenian art history, 5 different names, every time you can pick, Yerevan Kochar will always be there. And Yerevan Koçar, he lived in Tbilisi, then he was in Paris, he was exhibiting next to Picasso and Miro, and he was founder of one specific style that I will talk about later, just in a couple of minutes. And he moved to Yerevan in 1936, and his influence was also very big. He was one of the artists who began doing such sculptures that nobody had seen before. And now today, Yerevan, one of the symbols of Yerevan is his monumental sculpture of Sanusi David, and that's how important and essential he was. But in '36, when he moved here, he got into prison by the KGB, and for a couple of years he couldn't get out of there, and he lost his
memory?
No, not memory. He lost his deaf on one ear. He became deaf on one ear, and this how the situation with the artist was. But at the same time, he later in 40s and 50s, he was creating, and we did his exhibition in 2013. And it was part of our inter-museum collaboration series, because our exhibition programming has different sub-programs, sub-series that we do with collectors, artists, and other institutions. In this case, we're collaborating with the Gallants Museum and also with private collectors, and we're trying to show how he was finding the time, how he was fighting the time, how he was challenging the time to stay and to be further than his own period. That's why the artworks that you see here, they are from private collection, like the middle piece, when he's showing this meeting of like the Christ and with Madonna, etc. But it is the first time when it is very revolutionary and risky for an artist to show Christ in this way, like in case of nudity and the tambleo, how it is called, when you are faking somebody coming out of the frame. So and also his style is very unique. So we're trying to show artwork by Yerevan Koçar that weren't shown before, and this one is about war, and it is they compare it to Guernica by Picasso. It is the Armenian Guernica. Yerevan Koçar was creating his own Guernica, his own world. This is the painting that I was trying to talk about. In the 30s, he created this new style, this new technique that is called painting in space, and he was trying to do 3D painting, if we are talking with like modern language, and his paintings were sculptures and paintings at the same time, and they were spinning round, so there is a mechanism inside that the sculpture, you can see how it is changing its forms, the perspective, and the sculpture and painting at the same time. These are some images from the exhibition itself. And this is one of the paintings in space that haven't been exhibited. They found it out like 10 years ago in Paris, and it was in Yerevan, and we had a chance to exhibit it in 2013. When I'm talking about the impact of the diaspora, another very essential artist in 50s and 60s was Gallants. He was originally from Lebanon. His parents died during the genocide. He was raised in an orphanage in Aleppo, then in Beirut. So he stayed in Lebanon. He was very famous in Beirut, and he was collaborating with French artists as well, because there was Lebanon was part of the French colony. So Gallants exhibition was important for me personally, because my PhD thesis was about Gallants. So we're doing this exhibition in 2013, and it is also part of the inter-museum collaboration, because we're doing this with Gallants Museum. Gallants Museum, there are two private institutions in Yerevan, two private museums. One is the Fashion Center for the Arts, and the other is Gallants Museum, because the family founded this museum, and they are presenting the legacy of Harutun Gallants, which is a very extraordinary thing, because most of the time families don't act that way. They just sell the artworks, or trying to get the best from their parents, or trying to get the advantage. But in this case, what Harutun Gallants' son, Saro Gallants, was doing was just trying to find new pieces by his father, buying them and bringing them to this museum. We did this exhibition in 2013 again, and we called it Color as Form, because for Harutun Gallants, he was very influenced by Matisse and Cézanne, and for Matisse especially as a Fauviste artist, and the color was very important. When the color is more than a color, color is more than just something indicating how it looks, but also it can become a form, which Harutun Gallants was doing perfectly in his portraits and landscapes and naturals and still lifes. Sorry. And what we did again, we presented also Harutun Gallants as a graphic artist, because these pieces, he wasn't a graphic artist as you would call him, because every artist is all the artists are in some way graphic artists, because they are doing drawing on papers, sketches, etc. But not always that means that this person is a graphic artist, because graphic art is just a separate thing. The graphic printing, etching, I don't know, lithography, and this kind of techniques. But in his case, he has dozens, hundreds of different pieces, like, I don't know, a cigarette cardboard that he did a sketch on it, or just a paper piece that he did a sketch on it, and this all is kept in the archive. And what we did, it was like in archaeology, we are going through all the layers of his legacy and trying to pick the pieces and trying to make a collage that will cover his biography and present him from different angles. Because most of the artists who survived the genocide, they don't paint, or they don't create pieces directly indicating the genocide. They are mostly like abstract pieces, or somehow they are trying not to manipulate this topic. And the only piece when you see pieces by Harutun Gallants so colorful and so bright, full of life, you can't even imagine what a tragic life he had. When you just read the books, it's just awful and so sad. It's unbelievable how somebody with that kind of biography can create these kind of pieces. But in the graphic art, he was going deeper. Like in this little piece on the right, that you can see, this artwork is just called Orphanage. That's how he felt himself. How it was just somebody who is created for different pieces, and he's not whole in all. And this is how we did the exhibition. This blackish color that you see, his son was insisting, so we should do the black walls, so the colors would be more brighter, and you can see how joyful he was, although having that background. I'm sorry for my voice. If you don't like the lecture, blame it on my voice, because the Armenian art is really interesting. Hakop Hakopian was one of these few artists, repatriates again, that we collaborated directly with. We did his exhibition. One was called The Song of Different Colors, and the other Iron Narratives. Hakop Hakopian was a unique person, not just as an artist, but also as somebody you can talk to. He was very humble, and he didn't consider himself somebody very talented or something, because thank you. Because what he did, he brought something very new to Armenian art palette. Artists that we know, Martiros Saryan on the first place, of course, Minas Avedisyan and others, again Harutun Gallants, they didn't see the Armenia which Hakop Hakopian could see. He was from Egypt originally, and these colors of not mountainous, these flat surfaces, just sand and no green areas. It was, and he could see that in Armenia. And the Armenia that he could see was really unique for not only the art community but also the other artists. And Hakop Hakopian, that's how he stand out. And his attitude not only towards the landscape but also the portraiture. In the middle you can see the portrait of Peleshan, the celebrated Armenian director, documentary and not only. And this was something that caused a lot of trouble for Hakop Hakopian as well. He was dealing with like this cliché of formalist artist, not creating pieces that would reflect the communism ideology, etc. And his minimalistic approach later brought him to this new field. You can see how he is using tools in the lower left corner in this still life. Later, when he began creating these tools, he was creating those tools for his paintings. But later, he began also doing these kind of pieces. So when we were doing his exhibition, the first one we did with his paintings, and the second one we did a huge exhibition for presenting these extraordinary sculptures that as he was telling, I'm playing. It is like a play for me. It's like a game. I'm feeling like a child that I can put different screws and I don't know different tools and create something new. And what is interesting when you go and look at these pieces, whatever he uses, he always seems like in these death metal pieces, you always see something like natural and lively, like I don't know, a bird or a human being or a relationship between society and stuff. And unfortunately, the second exhibition when we were working on it, he didn't see the opening. We're working with him. I did the last interview with him just 1 month before he passed away. So the exhibition would open in a week, and he passed away, and it was really awful. But we opened the exhibition a month later, and also when he was alive, our institution presented him to the presidential award, and he's one of, if I'm not mistaken, he's the only artist that he got the presidential award. How is it called after that? Posthumous. Yeah, posthumous. Yeah, thank you. So we talked about diaspora in general, but I'm mostly focused on the artists, local artists in Armenia. But also we should remember those artists that were working internationally, but coming back to Armenia later, like Marcos Grigoryan. I believe Marcos Grigoryan today is one of the most celebrated Armenian artists, like or artists with from an Armenian descent. He was born in Iran. He was born in Russia. Then he was raised in Iran. He studied in Italy. He worked in US, and then he lived in Armenia. So that's why this was the title of the exhibition. Marcos Grigoryan wrote Crossroad, because he was on the crossroad of different cultures, and he was carrying those cultures. He was not only an artist, he was also an actor. He was a captivating personality with an amazing collection of Middle Eastern art, including crafts from the second millennia up to the 19th century. Second millennia BC, up to the 19th century. So when we were doing this exhibition, it also was a collaboration with Middle Eastern Museum, which is basically just based on his collection, and also with the private collectors. Marcos Grigoryan, pieces can be found at such institutions as Museum of Modern Art or Tate Modern. Marcus Buchan, one of his artworks is in the display at Tate Modern. So if you want to see him, you can see his original work at Tate Modern tomorrow. When we are doing his exhibition, we're trying to display artworks that are hard to present, because the museum that these works are featured that doesn't have the capacity, doesn't have the galleries to present these kind of artworks, for instance. And also, he's one of the founders of so-called, in the world, he's one of the founders of so-called earth artworks, when he uses soil, mud, straw to create pieces, like he's taking the ground and putting it on the wall. There is a huge, there are specific Iranian roots in this technique, what he is using. The roots that this technique they were using to create houses, and then he is using this technique to create this kind of pieces. But for the first time he used that technique when he was doing this series in New York about the Auschwitz. These huge paintings are called the Gates of Auschwitz. And when he was doing it, like, I need to do something presenting the Jewish genocide, because we had our own genocide, so I don't want to talk about it, I want to talk about them, so I don't want to just use this topic to get somewhere. And even in the 50s, when he was doing this series, it was a controversial topic in New York, and he couldn't display it. And only the Jewish Museum, if I'm not mistaken, they purchased it. And later, of course, it was displayed in 70s already, when it was different. And when he was doing this series, these 12 pieces, these 12 pieces, and the 13th piece, he used ashes on it, ashes and soil on it, and that's how he began using this technique to create other works. So he's mostly famous for doing these kind of artworks using mud, straw, and soil. But later, when he moved to Yerevan in late 80s and 90s, he brought his collection to Yerevan. He was very interested in Armenian carpets. He has this idea that we need to move forward. We don't need to do the same carpets and the same design all the time, like coming from centuries. We need to create new designs. And he even founded a workshop in Garni. He bought a huge house, he had his own workshop, women working there, and they were creating new design for new carpets. He himself was doing carpets, like hand-woven carpets, and also he was doing designs. He was in his 70s already, but he was an amazing man, very charismatic. We should not forget he was an actor, very famous. He was in, if I'm not in 5 movies in Iran, for the revolution, of course. And then he moved to New York. He had his own gallery, which was called Gorky Gallery. Then he was in Yerevan. But unfortunately, this is some images from the exhibition, and that's what I was talking about. Like this kind of artwork, there is no other gallery that could display them in this way. But the 2 paintings that you see, they're in the upper part. Those are from the series The Gates of the Auschwitz. And the other piece that you see here on the right, and also on the upper left corner, is one of his installations that we reconstructed for this exhibition. So it is not the original one. We did it in our museum, just reconstructing his original piece, and just to feature in the exhibition. But what was I talking about? When he moved to Yerevan and to Armenia in general in 90s, the government and state for more than like 15 years, they were promising him that they will give him a building, that he will have a museum of his own to display this collection, and also the carpets and also his artworks. But unfortunately, he passed away in an awful, not an accident, but it was an awful situation, because he, I don't know if you are interested, but I just want to share this story, so because it's a very, I don't know if our government will ever get the lesson how they should treat their artists while they're still alive. Because in 2007 he sold the house in Garni because he was trying to build his own museum, and the same day he was mugged at his own house. But he didn't have the money, of course. He was telling them. They kept him all night, they were torturing him, etc. He got into the hospital. He stayed there for nearly a month. He was recovered, but he was so stressed that when he left the hospital the next day, he passed away from a heart attack. That's how he lost all his legacy, because he didn't have heirs. The only man that could inherit it was his nephew in US, who, to say, is not a nice guy. So he just took the advantage. He took all his collection from Yerevan, and now from time to time we can see some of his pieces are just on auctions, and with very good prices he's selling them and getting all the money. And we lost all his latest years of his creations, his paintings, his the only which is left in Yerevan, like it was shown at this exhibition. We did it in two galleries. In one gallery we did this earthworks, and in the other we were trying to show we were showing his carpets and his philosophy in general of how this should develop, not to just stand and to go further. Again, talking about the impact of the diaspora and about how we should treat our artists while they are still alive. Arda Çakmakçıyan was one of the artists who was from the family of the patriarchs again, that moved to Armenia in the 40s. He was a very modernist and avant-garde artist in 70s, but in 60s, but he had some problems with KGB, of course. So there is this story that he told me about, that when he did, Komitas was his hero. He had a lot of pieces presented Komitas. For those, there are some friends here, my classmates. Komitas is one of the greatest Armenian composers. He is one of the symbols of Armenian culture. So he did, and of course, when he was presenting Komitas, Komitas was wearing how to say it, a robe, a gown, a robe, and so he was. They asked him to come to KGB, like they took him and they showed him a photo of Komitas wearing the costume when he was studying in Germany. And they were asking like, see, he's wearing a costume. Why are you presenting him as a priest? And he asked her, "They're Takchan." Yes, I'm not a tailor. I'm a sculptor. Well, of course, one of his artworks was destroyed. It was displayed on the street, and it was destroyed. One of his Komitas, and he moved to Canada, and he lived in Canada since 70s. And the only exhibition that he had in Yerevan, in Armenia, it was at the Fashion Center for the Years in 2015. In 2015, when we did this exhibition, there was this piece on the left, the first one. It is called A Walking Man. Today, there is a very funny story about this work. For those who here that know about this revolution in Armenia in 2018 and what is going on now today. So when he was creating this piece, the first one, there was an agreement between him and the chief architect at that time, Narek Sargsyan, the author of Northern Avenue in Yerevan, and other things that we would be happy not to see. So he had this agreement with Arda Çakmakçıyan that this piece, a monumental piece, would be on Northern Avenue, that somehow help the image that it has now. But so this agreement comes from 2005 or 6 something, and recently Arto Chakmanchan passed away 3 months ago, and just afterwards they began talking about that we should do this. They were talking about it like the last 1 year or something, but after he passed away they began talking about, there is this saying in Armenian, like it's like about all our artists. For those who don't know Armenian, like you die and then we'll love you. Like, after you die, we will love you. So it's all about Armenian artists. So now they want to do it. But those who don't know about this agreement, especially like anti-revolutionaries and those who are not very happy about Pashinyan and the new government, they are saying, oh, they are putting this as a symbol of revolution. Because they, like Kailov Mata, like walking men, because they walked to get the revolution. That was the idea, because they were walking from Gyumri to Yerevan. It's like the symbol of revolution. That's why they are trying to do this. But guys, this is like 50 years old, this story. It was the former government promised to do it, they didn't do it. Now this government wants to do it, and now it's a problem because it would be nice to have this piece, of course. The centerpiece is Komitas, the other is connected with genocide, and it's called Cry. He was trying to do his own cry, like Monk did his cry, and it is, you can't see it here, but it is different from different angles. It's like he's tearing, he's crying so hard you can't even hear the voice when you look at the piece, because he's like, his face is tearing apart, how big, like the mouth is opening, and all the face is just transforming. It's an amazing piece. These are other pieces, but what we did again, we also presented him as a graphic artist, because Arto Chakmachan, he was an amazing graphic artist. And again, when we're talking about painters, artists, and these kind of intellectuals in general, he was very humble, as Gopal. He was so humble about himself. He was just very sad that the promise. Up to the end, he was saying, when I was in contact with him via email just to see how he was like, well, you know, Armen, my working man is still waiting for its destiny. I would be happy to see it one day in Yerevan. One of my pieces to see one day in Yerevan. Well, it didn't happen while he was alive, and I hope it will happen one day. This is some pictures also again from our exhibition. Okay, so now we are coming to the period of 60s and 70s. I hope it's fine. I think I won't make it in 10 minutes, but I'll try to. So in 60s, 70s, what happened, there was this, because of the Khrushchev comparably free period in Soviet Union, where artists would be more free to create or stuff in 60s, especially, there was this boost of national identity and culture in general. And in 60s there was this new movement, not a movement, but now it is called, the art historians call it national modernist, which was not only in Armenia but also in different republics all over the Soviet Union. This when you use national some concepts and doing in modernism way, but it is still a Soviet art, because there are like not very political or social issues presented there, but the way they are done are very modernist. So what happened because of that in 70s, Armenia became the only country in the Soviet Union they had the Museum of Modern Art, which opened in 1972 by Henrik Igitian, who was one of the very famous and celebrated art historians. And also what we do at the Fashion Center for the Arts, as it is founded by a private collector, we are trying to collaborate with private collectors as well. Because what private collection is something that it is not available, accessible for a wider public. And for an institution like we are, it is very important to show something that is not available, like Fashion's private collection. And also in this case, Boris Galestan private collection, who has an amazing artworks by Minas Avedissian, Rür Galestan, and Dert Ashot. Dert Ashot, his real name was Ashot Hovanesyan. Dert, for those who don't know Armenian, means peach. Like his nickname was Peach Ashot. Because they say because his cheeks were very bright, or also because maybe of his colors that he used. Anyway, so Minas Vruid and Dert Ashot were those artists who are very, like, the color is the main theme for them, like in case of Gallants. And in the beginning of 90s, there was this exhibition in National Gallery which presented Martiros Saryan, Minas Avedissian, and Harutun Gallants. And I had this idea, so these are the artists who were, like, their color perception was unique up to 70s, so I had this idea. So what happened later? So they came to Saryan, Gallants, Minas, so I had this idea to continue this. What happened later? Minas, Vruid, and Dert Ashot, because this was the other, the continuation of this legacy of this unique color perception that we can see in Armenian art in the 70s and 80s. So, so we did the selection from Boris Galestan collection, and we did this exhibition with these three amazing artists from 70s and 80s. Minas Avedissian was like the core of the exhibition, and Mina Vruid and Dert Ashot were like the outskirts, if we could say, but like featuring and coming to his art as well. For instance, this work is one of the most famous artworks by Minas Avedissian, which you can see on his catalogs from 70s, and it is in a private collection. So as a museum, it was very important for us to show it to a wider public. It is the same for Dert Ashot pieces. These artworks you would never see in any institution because they are from the period, they are not very famous in his case. The same for Vruid Galestan. For instance, these are artworks by Minas Avedissian, but you would never guess that because most of the time we know Minas in this way, like colorful with bright red color, for sure, from his home village that he always used to capture. So in the same period, the artists from the same period, like Robert Elibekan, who is, I talked about it, there is this diaspora artist that impacted, there's the Yerevan and Shirak region, and also Tbilisi, Georgia, the Armenians from Tbilisi that were influenced by other culture, and their art was different. Elibekan's family, Robert Elibekan, this was an exhibition dedicated to the 75th anniversary, and we were working with him. And again, we're trying what we were doing in his studio. We were going through his canvases and stuff. We're trying to find artworks that don't look like Robert Elibekan, that are really different, because he's mostly famous for his works that are very theatrical, because he was also a theater designer, and he was using these actresses as muses and models in his paintings. But he was nearly an abstract painter back in the 70s, which for Soviet Union was something extraordinary, nothing that you can see in the museum or thing. And these were pieces that were not exhibited, like the one, like it's a portrait on the upper left corner, and no one, even like experts of Armenian art, would never guess that it's Robert Elibekan. That's what we're trying to do. These are more like his artworks. I have a funny story about this art piece from the right. This is a portrait of his wife, Mari, and he couldn't find it. He couldn't find it because he has a lot of portraits of his wife, and he was like, Armen, I need to find this one because she doesn't like the other ones. She only likes this one, and I haven't exhibited it ever, so I need to find this. I was the one who found it. I went to the art studio, And I found it because in the catalog the sizes were wrong, and we're trying to find with the size because there are hundreds of pieces. He's very productive. He's still working all day and long, so he's very productive. He's an amazing man. So when I found it, it was like, Armen, you saved my life. Mari would kill me if I didn't exhibit this piece, because she insisted that this time you should exhibit the portrait that I like, not the one that you like. Anyway, so what we did in this exhibition, we tried to make this red color as you use in the theaters for the curtains. So we're trying to make the gallery curtain, if you can say like it, because we also painted the ceiling in the red color, which we don't do in general. So that's how the mood in gallery changes. The other artist that was really different in 70s, 80s was Untitled Chapter, and today we would call him a hyper-realistic artist because his attitude was he was very influenced by so-called classical art, Renaissance period, and he was trying to put it, but he was using a unique technique because he wasn't using canvases, he was using gypsum, and he was this special
Plaster.
yeah, plaster, he was doing it on plaster. That's why the colors are so different. And he's mostly famous for this kind of pieces. And he was very much influenced by Yesayants Koçar because he was his art guru, and he was self-made. He was self-taught. He didn't go to any school. This artist painting like this, he didn't go to any school. And Yesayants Koçar saw him near the opera house when he was doing sketches as a teenager. He asked him, "Can I see it?" He didn't even know who Yesayants Koçar was. He's telling about it in his interviews, like, I was just a hooligan, I didn't do it, like, I was just having fun with it. But Yesayants Koçar saw him, he said, like, come to my studio tomorrow at this time, and he took care of him. And what we did again, we're trying to show artworks that he created later, in 90s. By the way, he began creating these pieces that are really different. That's why we call it multi-dimensional Rudolf Klatudran. That was his work. Like, these are not three-dimensional, these are multi-dimensions in my pieces. And by the way, he began doing this when he was in London.
Yeah.
He used to live here for 10 years or something. And when he went back and exhibited those works, people, and especially his lovers of his artworks, they were shocked because you never expect to see somebody doing this coming to. And they were thinking that he has some mental issues or something. His daughter was telling me, they were coming to me, his daughter, she's a painter as well. So like, people were coming around like, what happened to your father? Is something happening in London? Tell me the truth. This is the exhibition that began in 2017. So, this was shocking even for Yerevan in 2015 when we were doing this. Kamoni Garyan was an amazing person. And this artwork in 2015, we are doing pieces related not directly to Armenian genocide because it was the 100th anniversary. And as in this case, as we say, the relationship between power and violence is the united theme of the 18 works by Kamoni Garyan that we present. Because he was a designer in the 70s, he took a critical stance towards mass culture and different ideologies later. And these pieces, when we were doing them, they were unique because he was doing this in 80s, during the Soviet period. He wasn't exhibiting those, and this how he was presenting those that are in power, and also have the power to commit violence, and that's how power can change someone. Yes, somehow he resembles with the famous artist Basquiat. He was doing exhibition designs, poster designs, photography. He was mixing medias in photography, and his posters are still very interesting to watch, like very unique. He did the exhibition design for the Soviet History Museum, and what he did, it was a unique thing. The number 1917 would appear on the wall when it was done, because the lights of the sun would make the shadow, but the shadow was red. He was saying like, this is the red, the blood of the revolution that came to. Well, they were saying that red, the color of communism, etc. But for him, it was this thing. Oh, we are late, really late. How to do this very. Is it fine? Aren't you bored? So, in late 80s, well, we have the Khrushchev flow, and in 80s we have this Gorbachev perestroika, reconstruction as he called it. And after that, different things began happening in late 80s, and not only with the country in general, but also in art as well. Young artists in 80s, they begin this movement. It is called Third Floor, Yerotar. What happened at one of the meetings at the Artists Union, when the Artists Union, the Soviet artists acclaimed and celebrated, they were talking, and they were like arguing about the modern art, and they were telling that there is no new art, there is no good artists, young artists. And the younger artists, younger generation, that were mostly underground artists doing stuff that would never appear at the Artists Union, but as it was perestroika, as it was reconstruction, they said like, you are always telling that there is nothing new, but you don't even let us do anything, you don't even let us exhibit anything. So what they did, the head of the Artists Union said, okay, this is the Artists Union house, we are giving you the third floor. You can take the third floor, which was just a hall for, it wasn't the exhibition hall. The two halls, the two floors of they are for exhibition. The third floor is just this kind of hall with chairs and stuff. They had to remove chairs. So that's why they took this name, Yerotar, third floor. Armen was one of the founders, and this is just some photos from that period. Many artists that we did project later were directly or indirectly related to Yerotar third floor movement, and it was resonating. It was shocking for the Soviet citizens in 80s. What you see in the middle, it is Armen Grigoryan. This was a performance that they did in 87 at an official Soviet exhibition. They entered with this makeup of dead people, and it was like, hello to this Artists Union from an underworld. Ողջույն նկարիչների միությանը անդրշիրիմյան աշխարհից. And the artists, they were like zombies coming and going through this, like you are all dead, like only the dead people can understand the art that you are creating. And they were doing performances like in the West, because they all were impacted with the Western culture, pop culture. They were very risky, young, many of them. Like when you are talking about, like for them, with them, when you are talking about this moment, oh, it was so great what you did. we're just having fun. They didn't take it even seriously, but what they did was really serious. Because later, they had a chance to exhibit all these in Paris. And the president's wife, Mitterrand's wife, even she's standing there in the middle. She even came to the exhibition in '88, and they sold the pieces because there was this Spitak earthquake, and all the money, all the they did a fundraising through these exhibitions, and the money was used for the just to soften the aftermath of the earthquake and stuff. And in 2017, we did a documentary exhibition, as it was the 30th anniversary of the third floor movement. We had this idea. We created a teen council. Our museum now have a teen council. You can apply and become part of our institution and do some projects. And the teen council curated this exhibition, of course, with our help. And they did interviews with these artists, with those who live abroad. We did the video. The curator of the exhibition was Astrid Warabian. She did all the stuff with the teen council, and they did this amazing show. And in the in the right corner, you can see one of the artists. When he was younger, he had very black hair and black huge beard, and his nickname was Seb, black, and still they call him Seb, although he's already white. So one of the artists from the third floor, I'm sorry, how much do we have?
5 minutes.
Okay, I'm done in 5 minutes.